Welcome to Sell Smarter, Sell Faster, a podcast dedicated to helping sales organizations grow. Each week, we discuss proven sales enablement strategies and real-life examples with experts and thought leaders from across industries. I'm your host, Dani Buckley, Vice President and General Manager at Lead G2, a sales performance agency. In this episode, we're discussing partnerships, and even more specifically, those between SaaS companies and service providers. This includes why fostering and maintaining them are so critical when it comes to growing your business. We ask questions like, what makes an effective partnership? For those exploring partnerships, how do you know you're making the right decision? And how do you measure the success of a partnership? Joining me to answer those questions and more is the awesome Barrett King, Senior Manager, Global Partner, GTM Strategy at HubSpot. Barrett shares a ton of great insights, including how, when looking for potential partnerships, you should look to the products and services that are used in tandem by your end customer. Why it's important to aim for a surround sound approach when entering into a partnership, and finally, why every partnership should feel like you're investing in a lucrative relationship. Welcome, Barrett. I am so happy to have you here. Excited to jump into this conversation. How are you today?
I'm fantastic. It's sunny here and bright, and my kids playing outside, and it's a good day for sure. I'm excited to have a chat with you. Yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah. Sounds like a lovely day. Cool. So let's jump in. We're talking about partnerships. And to start, just to kind of get everyone on the same page, can you tell us just a little bit about your background, kind of how you got into being what I believe to be an expert around kind of like SaaS partnerships and partnerships in general? What do you have to bring to the table, Barrett?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I know a little bit about partnerships. I learn every day. So maybe I'm not an expert yet, but I aspire to be. I actually didn't intend to get into partnerships. It just sort of happened. So I went to school for digital design and came out of college really like 2008 or so, when the market didn't have anything for, designers and for marketing directors and such. So I ended up going into restaurants, and in my very first restaurant job right out of college, I was the host, but they called me a hospitality manager, which I took to heart because, ego and everything that comes with that. I had to be hospitable. I had to figure out a way to help us grow the business. And so the long and short of it is I actually developed a few different relationships with different businesses in the area. So Fidelity had a shop down there, and Morgan Stanley, and it was very kind of a financial heavy part of the city. And what I did is I went out to these businesses and I met with the heads of HR and the front office managers and all the folks that were in charge of where people ate, really, and how they ran their events. And I basically established what became a partnership program for the restaurant, where I was working with these vendors to figure out, how do we bring in more business? How do we host your parties? How do we curate this dynamic with you? Again, I had no idea what I was doing, but I learned as I went. And over the course of the next couple of years of my career, I was in and out of tech a few times. And each of those roles held some version of partnership. One of them, I was leading a sort of an events component of a bigger business. And so I had to establish dynamics with vendors that were in, radio and TV advertising. I had to work with local vendors for restaurant and food, for on-site, services. And so I was building partnerships there. And then later on in my career, as I got into tech, a little bit more deeply, I was in sales, and I was the head of sales for a small 35-person startup at one point, and that was all about partnerships. Later on, when I joined HubSpot, the first opportunity that I had, which is actually where I'm at today, was to build partnerships. I was partnering with marketing agencies to help them grow their organization. And so a lot of my kind of later stage growth around the idea of partnerships comes from certainly being in the profession in my current career, but also just a fascination with how do you, build interpersonal relationships over the course of really my lifetime. And what I'll leave you with, and this is sort of one of the kind of defining moments in terms of how I thought about partnerships, was that, it's like, call it senior year. I went to kind of an alternative school, but call it senior year of my art education. And I had done some actual design work, but mostly I was like the project manager. I was the, team lead. I was the speaker for every one of my projects because I just enjoyed developing relationships, being in front of folks and speaking to that point. And I remember standing in front of one of my peers at his final presentation. He was this incredible traditional artist. He had designed this like real world, hyper realistic charcoal drawing of Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin and a few other beautiful artists. And it was just an incredible work. And I turned to him and I said, man, I'll never be as talented as you are. This is such an incredible piece of art. He has a big smile on his face, and he looked over at me and he goes, I wish I could do half of what you do. I said, what do you mean? It was really simple, man. Your words are your art. And forevermore, I've defined that as sort of like my kind of mantra, if you will. But my words are my art. I've learned the sort of power of conversation, and through that, the way to connect with people. And ultimately, for me, that's where partnerships sort of became the anchoring part of who I am.
I love that. And I can't go down the rabbit hole of that, but that deeply resonates with myself too. When I think and compare myself to my friends who are visual artists or different kind of artists, words are also my art. So that I love that story. Thanks for sharing.
That's great.
Yeah. So just to, yeah, also kind of make sure we're all talking about the same thing. Partnerships. What are we talking about? Give us a little more context when we're saying define. I mean, you gave some good examples already, but can you give some examples like in the B2B world, just like maybe a couple different types of examples of the kind of partnership programs or partnerships that exist?
Yeah. So keeping it really simple, there's a few different components that make up any sort of partnerships in that sense. And I could say like the very heady sort of ethereal definition would be it's the intersection of value between two or more parties. It's sort of like the dictionary definition, I guess, in many ways. I would go bigger than that. And I would say it starts with a couple different dynamics. So one could be something like a vendor partnership. So you could say I'm a software company, B2B SaaS for ease of example, and I work with X, Y, or Z integrations. You might be like you're a software provider and you work with companies to help them build websites. We'll keep it really simple, right? And so maybe there's an integration that helps those companies to also actually everyone loves AI right now. So we can say like there's an AI platform that plugs into your website, system and allows people to really easily populate content. That would be an example of a partnership, specifically a tech partnership. You also, in the same sort of example's sake, might be that same vendor. You've got a website platform and you work with businesses that build websites, agencies or consultants and whatnot. You might build a channel program through something like that, a reseller program where they would use your software to help their customers build websites and subsequently sell that software as well. So again, I think about it as the intersection of the kind of transfer of value between different businesses, and in particular in B2B, it tends to be additive in some capacity.
Yeah, got it. Great. Makes sense. So what makes a partnership effective? What makes them good? What makes them work? Any best practices that you can speak to?
I think it's actually more simple than most folks make it. Ultimately, partnerships, again, being about the transfer of value. Actually, it's interesting. I just talked to somebody this morning. He's selling hardware with services to companies. They do, to really anchor it, they install electric vehicle chargers in homes. So they procure the actual system and they install it and they set up your kind of home chargers network or whatever. And like that's super niche and interesting and fascinating. And certainly there's demand for it. And one of the things he was asking me about specifically was how do I go and figure out like who I actually should work with from a reseller perspective, from a co-service perspective, all of the individuals that would deliver value to my customer. And I was like, well, it's that statement right there. When I think about defining and really in building out best practices and partnerships, you need to figure out what your end customer is likely doing with somebody else. So if you think about like what you do, so we'll use this example. So you build chargers for EV cars and you install them in people's houses. Those individuals are working with probably some form of a car dealer, like they're buying their vehicle at some point. They're probably working with some sort of like a mechanic or servicing business. They're working with probably an electrician for the like at least event of install. They may have other like green initiative based things. Maybe they work with solar companies. Maybe they work with other vendors in that regard. Those are likely the intersections of value that are happening around your product or service offering. So we could say that like in that case, we might partner with those folks. And if I back up and I say, well, how do I think about this more broadly across any type of partner program or opportunity? I would actually anchor in this idea of what are the services and the products and whatnot that are being used by your customer, either in tandem, ideally with your own product or service offering, or in like kind of an additive motion to that. And so if you think about best practices, you should really look for what your customer is they themselves looking for that you don't provide, again, product or service, and look to those organizations as your earliest opportunities to partner. And it's sort of the opposite of what you hear folks say, because usually they'll say things like, how do I work with companies to help sell more of my product? Or how do I work with companies to service more? It's actually a step beyond that, which is, again, what are the products and services and who are the companies that are talking to my customer already? And my customers working with that I have an opportunity to work with as well to increase my reach, my kind of market penetration and the value that I deliver to that end customer.
Got it. Makes sense. Love it. Okay, so here's what I want to talk about next, because I think because there's some that are like there's some partnerships that are very much I mean, there always should be mutually beneficial, of course, but there's somewhere it's more of a mixture between it's not like a clear, like one's a reseller and one's this, right? Like there
Sure.
can be different dynamics that exist. So when we're thinking about, I think maybe the more common, which is like one is more of a reseller, but they're tapping into an ecosystem or an audience or whatever that might be. So if someone is the reseller, so I'm going to give the example of us, Lead G2, we are a reseller. We are a partner of HubSpot, for example, and other software as well, right? So kind of like that B2B typical kind of technology partnership that might exist. HubSpot does not resell Lead G2, right? It is a one-way thing, even though it's a mutually beneficial experience. How can the reseller take best advantage of these partnerships, right? In growing their business. So it's one thing to be like, okay, I know this is a product or a service or a software that makes sense for my business model that my customers need. But like, what else? What else can they be doing? What do you see working that really takes like kind of like the doing it well to like doing it great in those types of partnerships?
Yeah. So when I think about one of the things that a reseller, somebody who's engaged with a software company can do really effectively, it starts off with being intentional around taking advantage of the surround sound. So it's super easy to say, like, I get value from this single dimension, whatever it is. Like I resell a software, I use a software delivered to my customer, whatever that intersection is. When you look at the way that people, then around that grow their opportunity, it gets far more interesting. So you see a lot of vendors say like, okay, cool. We've got like, software company that says we've got a reseller motion here. We also have a implementation motion. So you sell the software and now you can implement it as well. Or we might have like a need for integrations work. So you say, okay, cool. I'll skew a little more technical. My team's going to get really tuned up, do good integration work. So now I can resell the software in the front end and I can integrate because now maybe I can get some referrals from that company as well. Things like that. The third obviously would be like you could build something, right? And so I think it's really easy in B2B SaaS to say we've got something going on. It's working really well. We can sell it and we can service the customer that way. What if you built other things to add value on top of that? That could be another really interesting opportunity for you to say, all right, we'll like, do the sales thing in the front and help our customers. We'll service better in the middle, maybe get some good referrals. The third piece would be let's build something together that helps the end customer get even more value from the ecosystem.
I love that. It's like, yeah, just there's more opportunity than just being this simple, like I sell this thing and I follow this linear path. And I think, you're touching on this in those areas, but I just want to emphasize it because I know it's been my experience and I'm curious if you have anything to add, is like also just building relationships, right?
Totally.
With that company, whatever it might be, however that looks, whether there is the opportunity to get referrals or just to like strengthen the relationship and even just to see and explore the opportunities that you just mentioned, that happens through real relationships.
Yeah, it's 3D chess. Like I always describe it as it's not single dimension. We're not talking about advancing, left, right, straight, or otherwise. You really have to look at the board game in multi dimensions, and it is a game. I don't mean to be facetious or kind of tongue in cheek, but it's important to think about it in that sense. So what that means, you have to learn all the rules. You have to learn sort of all of the pathways toward the outcome that you're looking for. And then I always recommend in any vendor, to partner dynamic, to think about the multi-dimensional component of it in terms of not just the different ways you can interact with them, how they interact with you, how they perceive you, but then at the core of it, keep the customer as the focus. So if there's things the customer needs that they're not getting from that vendor, doors wide open for you, whatever that capacity is, to go and take advantage and show both the vendor and the customer that you can do more than just sort of dimension A, like we talked about.
Got it. Yeah, makes sense. So, our primary audience here is sales leaders, business leaders of sales organizations. And so in the B2B world, so for those that are maybe considering or exploring new partnership opportunities, do you have anything that you would advise what they should be thinking about, looking out for, kind of like asking themselves to make the right decision? Because even if it's just as simple as, we need this type of software, like how do you choose which one when there's a bunch?
Yeah, I think you have to listen to the market first. It's actually really easy. And this is probably more of an American view. So forgive me if you have European viewers. Like, I think the thing that we don't do well here, and I'm an American myself, so I'll say that openly, like self-deprecation here. We are very me-centric as a culture, as a society. And so like, one of the things that we do really wrong, and I talk to hundreds of leaders a year now at this point about partnerships. How do I start a program is the first question usually. And if it's not that, it's how do I work with companies to make more money, grow my business faster, kind of thing. You got to go back to the root of why you're trying to do this, which is to help your customer. And so I had somebody recently say to me, how do I build a partner program? I was like, well, when was the last time you talked to your customer? Like, well, we get an NPS quarterly. And I was like, no, I didn't say that. When did you last talk to your customers? And what I really encourage, and I think is really important, in particular in B2B, because you have access,
is go and talk to your best, most successful customers. Have a conversation with them. If there's things that they're doing really well with you, great. The next question should be, what are we not doing well? What should we incorporate into our product or service offering? And usually it's something that you're like, I'm not doing that. Like, I don't want to go and change the product offering that we have. I want to be more intentional about it. And so you say like, I will stop doing that. I will start doing that in terms of adding to your product or service offering. But 9 times out of 10, you're going to look for somebody else who's already doing that. So I go back to that thing I was saying before, which is like, when you think about sort of best practices, the first thing you should do is go and listen to your customer and look for the surround sound, the services and products around them that you are currently not delivering. Totally normal. Like, you should not be one thing for everyone. It doesn't work that way in the real world. But go and work with those folks. And the way that you do that is not to go to them and say, we want you to sell our software, service our customer. Otherwise, it's, hey, like, there's this thing in that we've observed, this event that's taking place, which is that our end customer is getting value from us and from you. Let's go figure out how we work together. And I think it's that simple. And I don't think it needs to be complex and over-indexed on. I think when you get to a certain measure of scale, it gets a little bit different. Things start to evolve. Because I think about partnerships in 3 different stages of evolution based off sophistication. It's building, it's growing, and it's scaling. And the reason I think about it that way is if you're, as you're describing, an early leader trying to build a program or help something kind of evolve a little bit, sophistication is key. Are your partners sophisticated? Are your customer needs sophisticated? What are the things that drive the outputs that really deliver value to the market? And if it's like something massively complex, then okay, maybe you're further along than you thought. But I wager a guess the persona you're describing is probably building their go-to-market strategy. It's why they're building their partner program around that. That's much more simple at that point. How can we transact together to help the customer? Then when you're growing it, you need a little bit of something there, some framework around a program, maybe some tiers or some benefits, a commission structure, things like that. But again, doesn't need to be massively complex. It's not really until the scale stage where you've got process and people and, product in place to do that work. And then you need to lean into like, let's think about this at a kind of multi-dimensional level.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like whatever topic I'm talking about on this podcast, somehow one of the biggest answers is like, keep it simple when you're starting out, whatever it is.
Yep. And document too. Like, keep it simple, right? But ask a lot of questions, do a lot of like sort of, the Q&A stuff is really good, but like actual feedback reception is important.
Yeah.
And that comes from listening with the intent to understand, like not to make an assumption, not to defend, but just like ask a question. What do we do well? What do we do well? Yeah. And then turn off your mouth, turn your ears on, and write everything down. And then do that constantly. And you'll notice a pattern in the data pretty quick.
Love it. Love it. Okay. So let's talk about measuring success. How does one measure the success of a partnership? How does one know when to stop? Because a lot of people stay on the train and maybe shouldn't.
Yeah, it's a good one. I think on both ends, it's really important to always reevaluate frankly, the reason why you're there, right? So in terms of measurement, data is definitely, it's either really present in partner orgs or like completely devoid of that. Like, you just don't see it at all. I think the core fundamentals are, partner market fit. What % of our partners are doing the thing that we're looking for them to do every day, week, month, year? And so it's something like 20% of, like 80% of all of your revenue comes from 20% of your partners. That's kind of true in a lot of industries. So you say like, all right, cool. Do we have consistently 20-ish% of our partner base actually reselling? 20-ish% of our partner base co-servicing, whatever that mechanism that you're looking for is. And then you want to look at a percentage of that that's happening on a regular basis. So there's the original CRO of HubSpot, Mark Roberge, has this thing called the science of scale. It's this programmatic way he looks at helping businesses grow. And he uses PET. P% of people do E-event over T time. That's for product market fit. I've adjusted it and like frankly stole it because it's beautiful and brilliant. And I think about it in terms of partner market fit. P% of partners do E-event over T time. So for example, you might say like they log into your software and they take action against 3 or more of your applications once a month. You might say they help 2 of your customers to onboard twice a month and they sell an instance of a license or whatever that framework is. It's, the value event that I've talked about. Yeah. And then you plot that on a spreadsheet and you do it every single month. And the moment you see that stuff start to get away from baseline, start to turn orange or yellow, or even God forbid, red, then you start to say, okay, well, how do I, like, what changed and how do I move it back in the other direction? You want to keep your customers happy. They got to be yellow and green, which means you got to consistently measure that value event over and over and over again. And then, at some point that starts to wear thin, and then you got to think about how do you diversify that. On the other side of the same coin, you think about being the recipient of that, you're the partner yourselves. It's got to be about you. Like, I know it's about the customer. I appreciate that, but it's got to be about helping your business grow. If you're growing by being with that partner, with that other organization, great, stick around. You don't have to love it. Like, I think there's a lot of folks, if this is probably controversial, but that they want to love it, right? They want to feel good about it. Like, respectfully, I kind of want to say to some of those folks, like, you got to move on. Like, business isn't always about that. You should feel like you're investing in a good relationship with mutual values, though. And then, so that's the thing that I would lean on in terms of the other end. Yes, you should generate revenue or services, or you should grow your business by this partnership being present, but your shared mutual values are really the core, the crux of what makes this whole thing worthwhile.
Love it. Thank you for that very just like tactical thing that people can do. I love when we can leave folks with that. Totally. So that's fantastic. Well, we are at that time to kind of wrap things up, though, of course, I'm sure we could chat for a long time, but, anything that we haven't touched on that you just want to be sure our listeners hear, words of advice, closing thoughts, anything for us?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think partnerships is a growing profession. It's been around for, eons in that sense, but at its core, B2B partnerships, in particular around SaaS, are really evolving, accelerating. Jay McBain over at Canalys is doing some great research and work around it. There's some brilliant thought leaders. Jared Fuller, who's over at, Reveal right now. And it's just really awesome folks. Asher Matthew over at Partner Leaders. Like, folks are doing a bunch of really good work. My advice, same thing that I've done myself, phone a friend. Like, go and get yourself involved in the network. It's a very helpful community. Ask questions. LinkedIn's a great resource. Folks are welcome to go and connect with me on LinkedIn. I have my own show, Outcomes. It's all about partnerships. So happy to be a resource for anybody. But the way that I've learned, the way that I've grown is by asking just as many questions as possible about the community as I can, and then just keeping my ears turned on to learn on a regular basis.
I love it. That's great. Thank you, Barrett, so much for your time. I appreciate it. Always a pleasure chatting with you. And as you just mentioned, we'll leave in the show notes your contact information, your LinkedIn, your podcast, so people can check you out and get in touch if they have follow-up questions. And of course, my information's always there, and I always welcome continued conversation with any of our listeners. So thank you, everybody, for joining, and we'll see you again on the next episode of Sell Smarter, Sell Faster. Until then, happy selling. Thanks for joining us on Sell Smarter, Sell Faster. If you like what you hear, click that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. Be sure to visit our website, sellsmartersellfaster.com, where you can find even more helpful sales enablement and inbound marketing content.